Hello class, thank you for joining in this meeting. Today's meeting is to discuss about international environmental governance and agreements. First, we will discuss about international environmental governance. What is International Environmental Governance or IEG? IEG comprises global and regional environmental agreements, decisions, and policies, as well as the institutions that make them and the process by which they are made. IEG can be defined as the sum of organizations, policy instruments, financing mechanisms, rules, procedures, and norms that regulate the processes of global environmental protection. So, the conclusion is IEG is ultimately about international processes and institutional framework. The current system of international environmental governance consists of three basic elements. These are three elements of IEG. 1. Collection of intergovernmental organizations such as United Nations Environment Programme or UNEP, United Nations Development Programme or UNDP, other specialized UN agencies and commissions that are responsible for coordinating policy on the environment at the international level. The second is framework of international environmental law, such as Framework Convention on Climate Change, Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. These are legally binding agreements among countries to take joint. And the last is financing mechanisms, such as World Bank. Other multilateral development banks provide for development activities with environmental components. Other financing mechanisms such as the Global Environment Facility. The weaknesses and challenges of IEG. International policy has all too often focused on sectoral approaches. For example, separate approach to land degradation, forest policies, and water management, often by different agencies, even though three areas are intimately related, such as clearing of forests is a major contributor to erosion, flooding, and water quality problems. Progress in solving environmental problems can only be made strategies to combat them are consistent with a priority objective of the international community and most countries, the eradication of poverty. Environmental policy must be integrated into and coordinated with development policy if it is to be effective. This is the second point of our discussions, that is, international environmental agreements. What is international environmental agreements? International environmental agreements or environmental treaties or multilateral environmental agreements or MEAs are the legal framework for international environmental governance. They are the official expression of the collective will of national governments to protect the environment and steward the earth. Environmental treaties cover a vast array of international environmental issues. The rapid growth in adoption of MEAs reflects more than just an emerging realization of the scope of environmental decline and its consequences. The changing face of environmental agreements. Environmental treaties negotiated in the 1970s and early 1980s were usually limited to single issues, such as pollution prevention or conservation of certain species. For the example, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, or CITES, whose goal is to protect vulnerable species from depletion through illegal trade. The Ramsar Convention, which established a regime for protecting wetlands important to migrating waterbirds, or the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, intended to address acid rain and other immediate air pollution effects. By the mid-1980s and early 1990s, attention had shifted to broader treaties that provide frameworks for action on overarching topics such as climate change and biodiversity loss. For example, the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 was the inspiration and launching event for MEAs of this type. These agreements treated the biosphere as an integrated system rather than as disconnected forestry, marine, wildlife, and atmospheric sectors. The important role of ecosystems was acknowledged for the first time. Framework agreements launched at the Earth Summit were the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the mother of the Kyoto Protocol, and the Convention on Biological Diversity. The strengths of MEAs. Environmental treaties have demonstrated some clear strengths. MEAs are not static documents but living institutions. Agreements that, while formally set down, are always subject to renegotiation as parties to the agreement change or new circumstances arise. The Montreal Protocol on Substance that deplete the ozone layer, which called for a gradual phase-out of ozone-destroying CFCs, was strengthened several times as new scientific evidence surfaced showing the severity of global ozone depletion. The nations that signed the treaty agreed to speed up the phase-out and further restrict the most damaging ozone-destroying chemicals. However, there are some limitations of MEAs. First, slow negotiation and ratification. International negotiating processes must accommodate the differing views of as many as 190 governments. As a result, they are often excruciatingly slow, often with a decade passing between the time the international community begins to mobilize and the time a final treaty is signed. Even then, the treaty does not immediately enter into force, since it can take years to be ratified by some minimum number of countries. The second is compromising toward the lowest common denominator. Treaties are formed by consensus, so some compromises are to be expected. However, there is often a pronounced tendency toward lowest common denominator bargaining, where ambitious goals, mandated targets, and firm timelines are either removed or diluted. And the third is lack of monitoring for compliance or performance. A high percentage of treaties do not insist that nations monitor their compliance in any systemic way or attempt to measure the impact of their actions. The solutions of some limitations of MEAs. States may very well enter into agreements with other states if the immediate benefit is evident and the cost of reaching the agreement are low. This happens especially in the case of coordination problems, where the common interest is quite obvious and difference of opinion are not related to core interests. The solution is expectations and demands are clearly stated and sanctioned. The other problem and the solution: lack of technical and financial resources. Many developing nations simply lack the technical capacity and financial means to fully carry out their responsibilities under the environmental treaties they have signed. The solution is science knowledge. The role of scientific expertise with regard to the opportunities for political problem solving. Thank you for joining in this meeting and see you in other meetings. Bye bye.